Council Transportation Committee for August 7th, 2023. Today, we don't have any business items and do not have anything to move, but I assume we can say the agenda is approved? All right, very good. The agenda is approved. And then we do have one information item tonight, which we've got Nick Thompson and Chris Beckwith here to present the Transitway Advancement Policy and the Blue Line Extension. And welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Nick Thompson, Deputy General Manager for Capital Projects.
And hello, I am Chris Beckwith, the Project Director for the Blue Line Extension LRT project.
So we are here tonight or this afternoon, to talk about the Transitway Advancement Policy, and in particular, how it will be applied to the Blue Line Extension. The Transitway Advancement Policy was adopted by the Council last November after a rigorous discussion about updating how we manage transitways in general and bring information before the Council as important decisions are made to advance a project. And in the role of the council sort of has, or does have, two roles for transitways. One is as the MPO, the planning organization for the region, with responsibilities of adopting the transportation policy plan. And in the planning function, it is often adopting a new transitway into the transitway policy plan that is brought forward either by a local agency. For example, the Blue Line Extension brought forward by Hennepin County, or sometimes by Metro Transit. If it's the arterial BRT network update, we would be the lead agency bringing that forward, developing those projects. And the part of the policy related to the transportation policy plan was really around what information the lead agency of the project needed to provide before it is adopted into the Transitway policy plan. The second element of the policy was reflecting when we are the lead agency for developing an individual transitway, and often that is Metro Transit that is the lead to develop and manage these projects as they develop from project development, engineering into construction, and obviously as the major operator in the region, we operate and maintain transitways once they're open. And so the policy requires that we bring specific information prior to moving project to a new phase of its development, and talk about what risks are going forward if you advance the project, so that when you're voting to advance the project, you're fully aware of the risks. And we're doing this in part because we have a lot of projects coming through, and it's sometimes we only talk about an individual project, and you wanted to be aware of all the risks that was bringing to the council at what we say the enterprise level, which is the cumulative risks on financial or staffing or other elements in the region, so that you were not just advancing a project without thinking through the overall impact of that project on the region and other projects. So we're at a point with the Blue Line extension where we're going to be seeking to move forward the project. And so we wanted to talk today as it relates to the policy, where we're at with the project, some of the key elements of how we're managing risks with the projects, and answer any questions before we actually bring the action to you in the future. One of the things that we really talked about several times in the past year is how we wanted to try to bring the information for you at a meeting before the meeting you had to vote on something, so that you had time to ask questions for us to follow up on, and really think through these very important decisions. So today is sort of where we're at. We're giving you information. Obviously no action today, but we're anticipating an action coming up for Blue Line Extension in the future. So just to kind of describe major transitway phase, this would apply to Blue Line Extension, Green Line Extension, Purple Line, Gold Line, this kind of process of major transitways that follow an FTA model. They start with locally led planning, so a local agency develops where the corridor is, what the mode is, often generally where the stations are. before it enters the TPP. After it enters the Transportation Policy Plan, there's a point that it then goes into project development. And once it goes into project development, that's when Metro Transit typically takes over. So that's a major milestone. And when we take over a project, there's an agreement with the local agency who continues to fund the project. And so we have an agreement on how we're going to advance the project. It's not uncommon for there to be several years between before it entering the TPP and getting to project development. So these are not necessarily happening one right after another. Then it enters an engineering phase where we're doing the design, a lot of the work with community stakeholders, getting right down to exactly where everything is before we put the project out for bid in construction. Construction phase, a project like Blue Line Extension, we anticipate 3 to 4 years of construction. Right away is in the engineering and construction phase, and then we complete the project and open it to the public, the operations phase. So Blue Line Extension is a little bit unique in that we are in the engineering phase, but we're also sort of in the development phase, some because we are going back to get a new alignment, and we're keeping the mode, but we'll be asking the Corridor Management Committee in the next couple months to approve a new alignment for the project, which is often sort of a project development phase. So we're a little bit in two phases, but we're really consider ourselves in the engineering phase, and we are going to come forward with a new agreement with Hennepin County about how to manage that engineering phase, and that is called a capital grant agreement. And so before we enter that capital grant agreement, we wanted to talk with you about what's within that agreement, and then how we will manage risks in that agreement.
Okay, I'll take you through a couple slides here. This is the Blue Line Extension shown here on the screen here. It is located fully in Hennepin County, and we actually are working on a modified route that was adopted last summer, and it was adopted with some options, and we spent the last year evaluating those options along with the cities and our stakeholders, doing extensive outreach. At the same time, we've been moving forward an anti-displacement process and had a recommendations report in May, and that is ongoing work. And then the last bullet on this slide is kind of our next big step with our Corridor Management Committee in September. We are hoping they will consider a resolution to adopt the final route so that we can proceed with our supplemental draft environmental impact statement. That route is simply the track alignment from end to end. So there's lots of decisions still to be made, but we want to get down to one line on the map that would represent the tracks end to end. The project schedule shown here, we're in that second, kind of the boxed in yellow area where we are working on that environmental review, as I mentioned. After we have a supplemental draft EIS published, and there will be a public comment period next year on that, a formal public comment period, municipal consent would start right after that. So again, there's work to be done to get all the way to 30% design plans that would feed into that municipal consent process. And then we would, it says begin engineering, but we really are working on engineering all along here. Again, we'll be working up to that 30% plans and then station area planning during this phase as well. We will then develop final design plans and lead into construction. And again, across the top here is community engagement all the way. It's really important at this phase in the project. It continues to be important throughout detail and final design and construction as well. And then also this anti-displacement process is overlaying the entire timeline as well. Now to give a little background on the capital grant agreement for engineering and construction. This agreement, again, we're not bringing this forward to you today, but this will provide you some background information on it. The term of the agreement would be September of 2023. That's what we've got in the draft right now, and that would extend through December of 2024. It would be amended then before entering the construction phase of the project. However, the terms of the agreement now are set up in a way that we wouldn't have to negotiate construction phase clauses or anything like that. The agreement is set up so that it should be able to extend all the way through the end of the project with some minor amendments along the way. The cost, or I guess a better way to say it would be the grant amount to the Met Council would be just over $75 million as shown there. The parties are Met Council and then Hennepin County and the Hennepin County Regional Railroad Authority. Currently, we have 2 existing grant agreements, one from Hennepin County and one from HICRA. This agreement that will come before you will combine the 2 parties into a single agreement. So that is more efficient for us and for the counties as well. And then the purpose of this agreement is to provide funding for engineering and construction. That includes right-of-way acquisition. It does establish a governance process that I'm going to go through and assigns responsibilities for the project between the parties. So I wanted to emphasize the partnership. So we've been working really on developing the language in this agreement for the last 9 months. We started with the Southwest Capital Grant Agreement, as well as the Gold Line Capital Grant Agreement, and kind of used that as a starting point, and then really took a look at the whole thing to decide where can we make sure that the Met Council's Transitway advancement policy is considered, as well as the needs of the county as the primary local funder as well, and their need for transparency and to be part of the decision-making process really early on. So the agreement itself really does emphasize the partnership between the parties, the collaboration, not only in negotiating the agreement, but that's envisioned for ongoing into the project all the way through construction, that shared decision-making with our new governance, risk management strategies. So how do we identify the risk management? We'll be talking about that today, some of the risk items at a project level and an enterprise level, and then that will allow us to mitigate those risks and address those risks in partnership with the counties. And then the transparency within this governance model, which I'll explain next. The major changes in the capital grant agreement compared to the previous transitways and really the previous agreements on the blue line as well. It implements this new project decisions board, which would approve and authorize major project decisions. I'll talk about that in the next slide. It does integrate the project office with staff from both Hennepin County and Met Council in leadership roles. So this is a new model that we've employed on the gold line and purple line. I would say blue line takes it even a step further. There's even some more positions that are envisioned to be leadership roles that are direct county staff that are working in the office full-time. And then streamlined reporting and processes that maximize efficiencies for both parties. I have to say, having been worked on the Southwest Capital Grant Agreement and implementing some of the requirements, and same with Gold Line. This one really, we took a step back and we decided which kinds of reporting does the county actually need? How can we streamline those so that the reporting to the Federal Transit Administration is the same as the reporting that we would do to the county, and kind of merge those types of reporting. And we really feel like we've eliminated some of the processes that aren't necessarily required and added a few that would be more beneficial to both parties. And then clarification of the financial roles, which Nick is going to cover. But let me dig a little bit more into this project decisions board. The PDB, it's a new governance board, and it would take the place of the Executive Change Control Board, that model, the ECCB, which is being used on Southwest as well as Gold Line. And the PDB would actually replace that. Instead of the ECCB, we would have this new board instead, comprised of the following 5 members. We show 2 members from the Met Council, 2 Hennepin County Commissioners, and 1 HICRA Commissioner. You're probably seeing right now that there's 5 members, and there's 3 from the county and 2 from Met Council, but we also have provisions where nothing, in order for an item to be passed, you would need 1 vote from each of the parties. So at least 1 Hennepin County vote and at least 1 Met Council vote. So it does kind of safeguard that, maybe Hennepin County coming in and being able to move an item forward that the Met Council wasn't so sure about. So we've got that provision that you would need a Met Council vote. It approves this PDB would approve or authorize the negotiation and execution of agreements, contracts, amendments, change orders greater than $500,000. And so that new number of $500,000 is slightly higher than we've used on previous executive change control boards. But we feel like that captures the major contracts. And then we also have an integrated project team. So anything below that, contracts, change orders that are below that value, would also be the project team, the project management team would also be well aware of all of those smaller contracts as well. And then they would approve the scope, schedule, and budget of the project. So this is common for the counties, the ECCB, and the other governing bodies to approve that scope, schedule, budget at different milestones. And then the use of project funds, including any early construction work. So if we have a letter of no prejudice, a letter of an LONP, or work that is conducted under FTA provides pre-award authority for certain items that can move forward, but the local dollars are at risk. This is the body that would actually review those items and grant the project permission to move forward with that. And that would be at-risk dollars of the county's local funding. And then lastly, the PDB would develop and adopt its own bylaws. On other projects that I've worked on, I've seen the county boards actually adopting bylaws and passing them along for the ECCB, which doesn't allow the entity to develop those own bylaws themselves. So this is a nice development too, that the entity will be working together, extending that partnership to develop those bylaws on how it will conduct its business.
So I'll go back one to emphasize before we get into the financial, the importance of the bill, of a couple of things here. One, approval of the project budget. That is going to be a key decision of this board as we develop what the cost of the Blue Line extension is. It's very important to get the budget right, and that's what we're going to manage to. You know, some of our challenges with the Green Line extension right now is that the budget that was adopted was not high enough for what the project actually became. And so because the PDB will be approving that, but we will, at staff level, be recommending that budget. And as Chris mentioned, each agency essentially has a vote in what that budget is. So we're really protecting the council's financial interest in the adoption of that budget through this PDB board. So that's a very important change we see.
Finish. Yeah. No, go ahead, because I think, you know, if you go back, it'd be good to pause actually on the PDB. Okay, so
Yeah,
finish what you were saying, I'm sorry.
So we can pause here and talk about the governance model. This is, I think, and we both, you know, as we developed this, we both parties saw this as a great advancement on how to manage a Transitway project.
Perfect. Any questions or comments? I guess I know I had a question. Councilmember Chambliss.
Okay, so for the CGA, the $75 million cost, is there a time period past December 31st, 2024 that will have a similar cost?
So, Madam Chair, so this is, we anticipating to cover the costs that will be incurred on the project between now, or essentially September 1st and December 2024. And then, obviously, future phases will be much higher costs because we'll start to bring the construction-related cost into the CGA to bring the local dollars in that is matched to the federal. And so the additional revenues that go into the grant will be through amendment. But we're forecasting out the cost to the project over that time period with the 75, but there will be a significant, as we get to the construction phase, significant new costs that will be entered into this agreement through amendments.
Okay.
And votes.
Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you. And so, I had a lot of questions. So the composition of the PDB, can you compare that to the existing ECCB composition?
Yes, Madam Chair. The existing ECCB, which we currently have an ECCB on Green Line Extension and Gold Line. It is chaired by the chair of the Met Council and has a council member and for Green Line Extension, it has a similar makeup to this, but it didn't have the controls like we are proposing here, where there has to be at least one vote from each agency for something to advance, and the bylaws had to be jointly agreed to. So that's the big difference here in terms of, but there is, ECCB has majority county membership today, so that is the case. And then there's a little bit more flexibility on the council's standpoint here in that it was envisioned for the green line and gold line that it had to be chaired by the chair of the council. And we've built in the flexibility for the council to, it could be chaired by it could be two council members. It doesn't necessarily have to be the chair of the council that is the member on this. That's a decision that our council gets to make, who the two members are.
Councilmember Chambliss?
One more. So in the revision of the bylaws for the PDB, I thought I heard that you say the existing ECCB members would be participating in modifying those bylaws, or did I misunderstand that?
Madam Chair, council member, I think the envision was that you would appoint, the members would be appointed to the PDB by each respective agency, and then the new members of the PDB would develop the bylaws for the PDB. So there are no bylaws. It's starting, I mean, you'll look at other actions for development, but you really get to jointly develop the bylaws going forward. They're starting from scratch, so. And then they will be voted on.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any additional questions or comments? Councilmember Carter?
I just had a question, just information. The HCRRA, is that Hennepin County Railroad Authority? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Councilmember Carter?
The cost that we have here is through the December 24 period. What is the overall budget for this project?
Madam Chair, commissioners, we have not set that budget yet. There was an initial budget for the green line or blue line extension back on the previous alignment that was adopted. But this is a new alignment, has new stations, and also is several years later in the process. And so over the next year is when we'll develop the new next cost estimate. And so the official budget is not approved yet, and will be bringing forward to this board and to the council as it is developed.
So that is the major
Yes.
piece of discussion that this board and then the council will entertain. Thank you.
Councilmember Chambliss and then Cameron.
I think he just answered my question, but I want to hear it again. And that is, once this board makes decisions, then it would be brought to the Metropolitan Council for a decision. And then if that's the case, also, what about the other members of the PDB? Would it also be brought to their councils and boards for a decision?
Madam Chair, members, that is a great question, and it's, the answer is a little, it sort of depends on the decision that's made. Simple decisions like approval of the bylaws, I don't believe would have to come back to the full council here. But a change order, if the PDB approves a change order over 500,000, that then would come back through our council, I believe, for approval. But it would not go through the county's board. And so there's levels of decisions, but the major decisions we would fully brief this council on. And the council retains its full authority over this project. But this board is a partnership board, a joint governance that for certain actions.
And thank you, Councilmember Chambliss. That was sort of the basis of the question that I had too, is what is our role here, especially like with some of the early construction work? Is it more informative until we hit a certain point with some of the, once the FFGA is issued in bids and things like that? Or, where do you see it looping back either through the committee structure or through the council?
Madam Chair, a couple of good examples I think that are very important. When we get to the construction phase, we will award a very, very, very large project. This board will have approved a budget for that, approved the procurement of it, the PDB. But that procurement will be managed through our council procurement process. And so it'll be advertised through our council procurement process. It'll go through the Transportation Committee. It'll be amending our budget to bring that in. The council will be the one awarding that construction contract. So there's some redundant, clearly some redundant things that go, but we have the full control and protections of the council for things like procurement and those major decisions like that, so.
So it's a way to streamline some decisions, be more collaborative with others, and share the risk throughout the project. Okay. All right, Councilmember Cameron.
Thank you. I think they got at the heart of my initial question, but just one other piece to that, and that is when is the PDB going to launch in terms of the timeline with the capital grant agreement? Are these two things moving simultaneously, or is one need to be completed before the other can move forward?
Madam Chair, once the capital grant agreement is signed, if it is signed before September 1st, we would anticipate that we would then start under the rules of the capital grant agreement on September 1st. And the PDB would, we would begin to form that, the first meeting of that. I don't know if there's necessarily, we'll try to get it as expedited and be on a routine basis, but it's then in place in an agreement starting when we envision September 1st.
Councilmember Carter, did you have your hand?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you. The capital grant agreement being signed as we enter into the PDB does not preclude that there still needs to be a capital grant agreement amended then. I'm just trying to wrap my head around the fact that we've got a capital grant agreement that does not include the whole project. So can you just please go over that again to help me understand how that works with the PDB and the capital grant
So,
agreement?
Madam Chair, committee members, the way we are currently under a capital grant agreement today. It's about to expire August 31st. When we've been negotiating, as Chris mentioned, for 9 months, the structure of this new agreement, a new partnership with Hennepin County, that we were always negotiating terms thinking, what agreement framework do we need for the entirety of the project?
Yeah,
And so.
as we now understand it.
Yep, with the thought that we want in place governance, process controls that would get us through the entire project, knowing though that we needed to amend to bring in new funding at different phases. But some of the core elements like the PDB, we anticipate will last the entire project. And so we were negotiating for the long term, but putting in some controls like the extension to December 31st, 2024, the grant of funds only through 2024, allowing us to continue to come back to this council as we move to different phases. But the general framework was envisioned for the entirety of the project until we are open to our customers.
Councilmember Pacheco, and then
Yes, Madam Chair. What happens to the other cities that aren't part of this agreement but have been planning all along? And do they have a similar presentation, and do they weigh in on this as well?
Madam Chair, Councilmember, so this is actually with Hennepin County. The agreement's with Hennepin County and Hennepin County Regional Railroad Authority, and they represent all of the cities in the Blue Line project. The cities are actually not providing the funding directly unless they have additional work that we are proceeding with within the project. It's the county's funds, and therefore the agreement is with the counties, and therefore the PDB is made up of county commissioners and Met Council members.
And then, Madam Chair, we will have agreements with each of the cities related to real estate, any scopes of work there'll be individual agreements as we move forward with the project, especially during the construction phase. And they may be giving the council money for work that is adjacent to or part of the construction, but is not part of the project. But their role in governance is probably through the Quarter Management Committee. They have a seat on that committee, which does have some advisory status with the project.
Actually, that's a group of,
Yep.
that
Yeah.
committee, that's what I was wondering how. Now, they may not have all the money in here, but they certainly have been impacted by the decision we're making.
And Madam Chair, they also have municipal consent approval next year, which is a very important control they have over making sure the project is right for their city.
All right, one more question on this, and then we're going to move because we got to get through the rest slides, and we have a shortened time here. So, Councilmember Vento.
Actually, I have two questions. Hopefully they'll both be short. Currently, do we have a sense as to where the cities are at in terms of whether they'll support via municipal consent?
Madam Chair, committee members, we will be asking this Quarter Management Committee for approval of a resolution and anticipate September to move this alignment forward.
Okay,
But we're very clear that that is not a vote on municipal consent. They get to
Right.
withhold that until next year. So we're not asking them for their municipal approval at this time, and they also do not want to provide that at this time, right? So till we get more information.
understandable, yeah,
Yep, yep.
understandable. I will say, being new to this committee, I get very nervous about spending lots of money, not knowing whether or not the communities along the proposed route, when it's determined, are going to be supportive. So, been through this in another life. My second question is whether or not it's possible or appropriate to make a request for a portion of the 75 million for the September 1 to December 2024 timeline, rather than the full 75 million. And that kind of goes back to my question as to spending a lot of money and not being totally confident that it's going to proceed. So is it possible to break that down and do it in portions?
Yes, Madam Chair, Councilmember, we've been talking about that, and that's sort of what we've did this spring when you approved the engineering contracts. We gave a limited notice to proceed to get us to August 31st, and we anticipate we'll bring forward a similar action when we actually approve it that would get us to a milestone like 30% design, which is really before we go to municipal consent or something. So we've been talking about an option for that. And to break up the 75 million into logical ones would be an option, and that's an option that the council has chosen on other projects and even on this project, so.
Great. Thank you.
We'll discuss that.
All right, Councilmember Chambliss, and then we do need to move on.
Yeah, sure. Well, we have other times to discuss that, but I think part of the reason why we are having this governing partnership is so that we can understand what it takes to advance our projects. And if we don't do that early, then it just it complicates things down the road. But I'll stop there.
It's a great conversation. I don't want to stop it. I just know we have a pretty hard stop. So, and I want to get through the rest of everything. And eventually this will be coming to the committee for action at some point. So we'll be able to continue discussion. So I'll turn it back over.
Yep, so, Madam Chair, committee members, one of the very important changes in this capital agreement is around financial assignment of risk, or financial assignment. You know, this is a grant of the county giving us money to work on the project. But as we've learned from other projects, that financial assignment of risk was not always clarified in these Transitway projects. Some of the issues we're having on Green Line Extension is because we didn't really think through what the 8 parties would do if we had to go over the budget. And so we really tried to focus on that in this negotiations. And so some very important changes in this capital grant agreement that we've come to agreement with the county on in the draft of this agreement. The council receives the federal funds for the project. And so we are retaining the responsibility for that in this grant. And that's the way we've done it on every project. That comes with a little bit of risk, that if for some reason we receive the federal grant and the project stops in construction and never restarts, and the federal government asks for a repayment of that federal grant, that risk retains to the council. We would argue that's a very small risk for a few reasons. Number one, the federal funding does not arrive until after construction starts, as we've just seen on Gold Line and we've seen on other projects. And by that point, that project, a lot of the risks have been resolved. You're in construction, you know the funding, you know the costs. So I just want to be transparent. We are retaining that risk in this agreement. We've never had to pay back a full funding grant agreement in our region, and so that's a small risk, but we want to be transparent. We are limiting the council's risk in other places. So there's local match to the federal. That we are limiting the council's risk to just the full funding grant agreement, the federal funds, and any other funds that the council is provided that are specific to the project. An example of that would be the state recently gave the project $50 million of state funds to the council to provide to the project. That's an example of funds that are specific to the project coming to us that would be part of this grant agreement. We are also saying the council is not responsible for cost increases should they occur beyond budget in this. And so that's a very clear area that we have not had on past projects, which is very important. And as I mentioned before, the PDB, which we have a vote on, and each action must require a council member to vote for, has a lot of controls over the financial risk. And so we're protecting the council through the PDB. And then the legislative change has been a big change on how different phases are managed. The council is now fully responsible for operations of transitways and capital maintenance in the long term. Prior transitways, the county funder was responsible for half of the operations. And so we are not dealing with operations and capital maintenance in this capital grant agreement, nor do we need to, because that is now a responsibility of the council, and we have a funding source for that issue. Hennepin County's assignment on this, they are the responsible party for the local share. They may bring other sources into that local share, but they are responsible for that. This full $75 million that we're talking about is coming from county sources at this time, and so they manage all the funding. There is no federal funding in this until we get into the construction phase, so they are responsible and accountable for cost through the CGA through that phase. And so they're retaining that, and then they're taking on, as we said, we are not responsible for some of these these risks that may occur for cost increases. The county is responsible for managing those should they occur. Hopefully they don't occur, but they have a responsibility. So this is a very big change in the financial, it's very important clarification and roles that we have not had on past transitways, and it's been, I think, is a major improvement to this process. And our local partner, we've come to agreement on this, so that I think it's in a good spot.
Councilmember Carter.
I apologize for interrupting, but while you're in this process, it does say here, the county is responsible, including project startup costs. You also talked about cost increases and the county responsibility for cost increases. Can you, first of all, and I just have a few questions here, can you explain the startup cost and what that is that would be different from?
Madam Chair, committee members, startup cost is an eligible federal expense. It's the cost to get ready to open the day where you're have staff, you're hiring staff, operators, maintenance. They often are costs that you have before you start revenue service. And there's, testing, training. It can be a substantial cost. It's eligible, so if we have federal funds available, half of that cost can be covered by the federal source. But it's we're saying our responsibility occurs once we start service. And so that if we were to hire, say, 50 operators 6 months before we start service, during that 6 months, that's a startup cost. That is a responsibility of the project, not responsibility of the operating phase that the council is.
And I do,
Councilmember.
I do understand that we are guiding the funds that we receive from the full funded grant agreement and any other sources specifically for the line, to the line, but that we're not responsible for other costs or cost increases, other than what we have specified. If they do occur, the PDB is going to be approving those costs. And we have votes in that process. But those costs are to be assumed by the county only or other sources. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, Councilor, the way we've written it is the PDB would definitely be involved. The council cannot be accountable to those costs unless you agree to it by an amendment.
Okay.
So,
And so there would be.
yeah, there is control over that. But there could be some scenario where the council does want to, so we left that open. But it would have to be an amendment agreed to by the council.
All right, thank you. That was the extension of my question. Thank you.
All right, go ahead.
All right, so talking this now to risks, enterprise risks. This is a very complicated slide, so I want to walk through it a little bit. So enterprise risks, again, are not project risks. They are risks to the full council of things occurring that you are trying to manage related to transit and operations and everything about the council. We spent a lot of time talking about enterprise risks with the council that was here, for those that were here in February. And the column on the left, which is labeled previous, is risks rated that we did in that time frame around, particularly we use Blue Line as an example, but they would apply to other projects too. And what we've done, we're still, we're still developing our risk process, and I would say we got a ways to go to define what they are, but we've updated what we think are the largest risks to this project. So I want to walk through them. So the second column is what we think the current rating is. The category is different types of risk: financial, operational, reputational could be a risk. The risk description, I'll walk through that, and then all risks need to have a mitigation plan for them, and some of them need to be mitigated now, and some of them have time to mitigate them, so I'll walk through a little bit about that. The number one risk to this enterprise right now, what it was for Blue Line, it was back in February, is can we hire enough staffing to operate this system as it comes online? And to think about it, what we're building between, we're in a much better spot today than we were even back in February. We're starting to hire more, we're our bus operator pools, but we still have a ways to go. And we're adding a bunch of transitways over the next several years, so we're adding to this need. Green Line Extension is on track to open in 2027, so it'll open before this project. But between Green Line Extension and Blue Line Extension, you have to think about it, we need to roughly double the amount of staff that we currently have today that are operating our light rail system. So that's a big issue. We have a lot of mitigation strategies in place, but we still believe that is probably the number one enterprise level risk, is hiring enough people to operate the system we want to build and are planning to build. Our second one is around meeting our safety and security strategies. You had a good update last week about the status of our safety and security plan. Safety and security is not just the number of police officers, it's the entire suite of strategies. And we hear a lot about this in our engagement. Do you have a good plan for this project around safety and security? And so, we believe that remains a top risk. It's a top risk among our customers and the public. And so we definitely see that as an enterprise risk. Obviously, we have time. That's a risk that would occur for the Blue Line once it's open. And so there's time to work on that, and a lot of strategies that are starting to prove that they're effective in this area. So really, part of that's a staffing risk too, and so we maintain that risk. There was a lot of questions about ridership related to this project, particularly back in November when we were developing this policy in October. We've seen some strong ridership gains in transit since that time, particularly around transitways. Transitways are performing very well, all-day service, be it bus or rail, is a strong area of growth. But there's a lot of questions that we still need to answer around building more light rail in the system and whether the ridership will be at a level that's strong enough to support the investment. We don't have ridership numbers today, but that is part of the next phase, is to develop some modeling once the alignment is picked, and we'll be able to bring information to you about ridership in the next year. Ridership forecast. This is an important regional investment, and so there was a lot of discussion of risk around the equity of investment in this region and where we investment, and if we don't invest on the timeline, what is the impact on communities to not invest? So that was a risk that we talked about. We rated that low back in February, but we're at a point we don't have the support or the vote yet of the Corridor Management Committee. We're getting close, but there's been a lot of debate about the alignment and the mode over the past several months, and so We generally felt that maybe this is a little bit higher risk than it was back in February, but still one I think we will be managing. And this is a nearer term risk. We definitely want to make sure we have a supported project to move forward by all the communities, and municipal consent will be a huge step forward in making sure that we have support. In terms of our financial risks, they have changed tremendously since February, for better. The legislative session has really cleared up some of our financial risks. You know, we have issues though. You know, we still have not resolved the funding gap on Green Line extension. And so that is driving some of our uncertainty in where we can invest our new revenues that we are getting from the sales tax. So that is a risk that needs to be resolved actually this year. Kind of our financial risk needs to be sort of worked out this year. You know, that's why that mitigation needs to be around 2023. We're in the budget process. We'll be working with you over the next couple months in general about what the new revenue forecast is for sales tax, how that is brought in, what the priorities are to invest in that. Is there enough funding for that? This is also a sort of an FTA risk when the fact that we have not resolved the Green Line extension funding gap is an important issue for the FTA. We need to resolve that. They have indicated, you know, you need to resolve your projects before we give you money for more projects. And they're seeing a lot of progress. I'm not saying that they're asking us to stop or anything, but you know, that's important. They want what they've already invested in regionally to be successful before they keep investing. So it's a risk that we see is less, for sure less, because there's way more funding options today than there was back in February. We have now really kind of resolved our long-term capital maintenance risk, we believe, with this new funding source of sales tax. That's, you know, when we build the Blue Line extension, there is no capital maintenance risk for several decades. You know, our first one will be when we replace the rail cars 30 years after we open. But that's a long-term risk that we now have a revenue source that can be used for capital maintenance. So that is a great advancement we've done since we talked about this. And then back in February, the operations maintenance of projects was a shared responsibility with counties. And we were having some challenges about cost share and issues about commitments long-term. That is now resolved. Operations is now the responsibility of the council and there's a lot of advantages to that we determine how the transit is operated on a daily basis, staffed and frequency, and we now have the resources to do that. So that's a really important change that, you know, went from a very high risk to one that we consider you could think about as a resolved risk. So very important. So I'll pause there on these risks.
Very good. We'll turn it over some questions. And first of all, we're going to definitely do a thank you to the legislature and to the many transit advocates who helped solve some of those very bright red boxes that we had there, because we're having, I think, better conversations now than we probably could have before that. Councilmember Vento.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nick, for all the reasons you just gave regarding the unresolved capital funding needs for existing and planned transitways, I would think it would be at a higher ranking than 5.
Madam
We're
Chair.
in August of 2023, and we're not resolved yet, and we've got to get it resolved this year. And frankly, I'd prefer that it not be on the 31st of December that it's resolved, for a whole lot of reasons, including your sanity. But I'm just curious as to why it isn't higher.
Madam Chair, council members, maybe I'm just an optimist. It's a little bit about how we're developing risk ratings too right now. We don't have a structure in terms of a group that we can go to and work that out. But I think we've made a lot of progress on resolving the Green Line extension funding gap. But we also, one reason it's less is that there are options that didn't exist to resolve it back in February. You know, not the council got new resources, but importantly, our local partners got significant new financial resources also, including significant relief of obligations They are no longer responsible for funding operations of transitways from their local sales tax. And so there's just more options than there were in February, so I think it's a reduced risk from that point. It's not resolved. Once we get this resolved, that'll be, for a variety of reasons, that will be very beneficial to the development of Blue Line and the completion of the Green Line extension.
Councilmember Vento, then Cameron.
I just want to thank you, Nick. I appreciate that you're an optimist, and I'm working on it. I would just ask that we as a committee and our colleagues as a council and our partners remember that despite the number 5, that one is just critically important for us going forward, because I think it poses a reputational risk when those things go unresolved, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you for your comments. Councilmember Cameron.
So I did want to ask on some of the operational risks. You mentioned ridership, and one of the concerns I have is that, and we're putting the alignment first without knowing the ridership numbers for the different alignments, and that information would be helpful prior to choosing an alignment. So to what is the delay in getting those ridership numbers prior to choosing an alignment?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Councilmember, I can answer that question. So we have done some analysis on ridership, some sensitivity analyses, so that we know that the project is still competitive for federal dollars. We are kind of comparing some of the options to see, we'll be able to report on kind of some of the general differences in ridership between the options, especially in Minneapolis. We've got that information that we've been talking about with the city staff. But once we have that line on a map, that's when we'll really develop the overall ridership. Again, we've done some analyses to say we're still competitive for the Federal Transit Administration's capital investment grant program. We wouldn't be advancing right now if we weren't. So we've done that kind of analysis. And so we're pretty comfortable moving forward. And the counties, obviously, as the local funding partner, are comfortable moving forward as well.
Madam Chair, committee members, also, the other important thing since February, back then, we didn't know, are we using a model that is post-COVID ridership levels, which are less, or pre? And that was a very important unknown at the time. We now do have guidance from FTA that we will be projecting ridership based on post-COVID trends, which we've now got a basis for. And so that's a really important change to how we're modeling, and I think it's what people were expecting. We couldn't use a forecast from 2019 ridership that is not reality today. And so we just got that guidance this summer, and so I think when we do give you ridership, it'll be about how, from a changed environment that we're in today, which, you know, we couldn't back in February, and I think we will be when we come forward, which is an important change.
And one of the incremental steps, and you correct me if I get this wrong, contained in this CGA is the supplemental draft environmental impact statement, which will include an updated cost and updated ridership, and that's spring next year? Ballpark.
Yeah, Madam Chair, it's spring, late spring into summer is kind of what we're looking at.
All right, additional questions or comments on the enterprise risk? All right, go to the next one.
Okay, so quickly I'll go through some project risks, Madam Chair. Nick and I were talking, I don't know that we've presented this table before to this group. This is a table that we commonly present to the Federal Transit Administration across all of the projects. So staff is really used to seeing this both on the Met Council side and our county partners across all the projects. Usually we'll present a top 5 project risks to the FTA. So we would continue that, and then also this is likely what we would be presenting to the Project Decisions Board as well regularly, the top project risks. And just to run through these, so there's 3 categories represented, and kind of as we did an informal sort of our project risks. Requirements are the ones that I wanted to touch on first, and that's number 1, 2, 4, and 5. And those generally are related to, so requirements in the project earlier on. So we've got environmental process, and if our supplemental draft environmental impact statement is prolonged, longer than we expect, that could impact design, construction, and revenue service. And also the federal, state, and local agency approval processes take longer than expected. That kind of aligns with the first risk as well, because we need to go bring the environmental process and many other municipal consent and other approvals through our partners. Then jumping now to the next, number 4, requirements risk, Corridor Management Committee. As I mentioned, we hope that they would entertain a resolution next month on the route, and if that would get delayed, that would likely impact our overall schedule as well as critical third-party agreements, number 5 there. Again, a requirement working with the cities, working with utility companies. We need to get those agreements executed before the FTA will be comfortable with us advancing. And then backing up, there's a couple of market risks, so item number 3 and item number 6. So market risk are increased labor and workforce costs. We have goals here to have the community actually working on these projects and getting trained to work on these projects on a variety of different jobs, and we're working on that actively right now, but that's really market driven. If, we'll continue to work on that if we don't have, the labor and workforce in the community, that's a risk we're putting on here as well. By putting it on the list, we can address it now, which we are doing. And then supply chain issues is something that's kind of ongoing from COVID. And then last on the list is just construction costs exceeding the budget and available funding. And mitigation for that is making sure that we're doing really sound construction estimates that have enough contingency to cover the risk we're seeing.
The big difference between the project risk and enterprise risk, the project risks are about what are the risks to complete the project and open it to service. The enterprise risks, you got to think, are longer term. The long term, like the life of the policy plan and stuff. And so kind of a different focus on management, but each of our transitways has a really robust project risk process that, and the enterprise risk applies to all of them.
All right, questions? Councilmember Cameron and Chambliss.
Okay, and I will try and be brief because we are limited in time. So I'll just quickly ask, for the project risk assessments, to what extent are the other partners involved in the project using the same, looking at the same risk mitigation? And then second, are we doing these risk assessments in-house, or is there an outside consultant advising us on this?
Yes, Madam Chair, Councilmember, great questions. One of the contracts that this group approved a few months ago was for a risk management consultant. So we actually do have an expert consultant that is helping to manage our risk assessment process. And absolutely, the partners are involved in this. The FTA is involved. We've got extensive involvement from all across Met Council, and then the counties as well. Cities, MnDOT, the Department of Transportation involved, and our consultants. And we do a very robust risk workshop and develop the risk register. This is just showing a snippet, but it's a very long risk register. And that's what we're actively working on right now to update.
All right, Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that we have, developed some tools for analysis and engaging where we're at in a particular project or process. I am looking at the scoring of the top 3, and with the project risks, I was wondering, did you factor in the scale and complexity of large-scale projects such as the Southwest Light Rail and the Blue Line Extension, and compare that to other large complex projects? Because I know that because of the complexity and the large scale, that keeping things on and all of the codependent tasks that are involved in such a complex project, it's almost expected that there are going to be some delays at certain points in time. So how are we factoring that in?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Councilmember, so these risks, actually, risk registers get handed off from one project to the next. So these are the same kinds of risks that you would see on a Gold Line risk register and on a Southwest risk register and Central Corridor, Green Line before that. So they're very common. They're the first one on the list here, environmental process, is a very common delayed item on these major projects. That's why it's number 1. We know that in fact, our environmental process has been prolonged a little bit longer than we expected a year ago.
Madam Chair, just quick, and we'll hand them off, but a 1-month delay on a light rail project is a much bigger financial risk than a 1-month delay on a smaller bus project. And so there is a scaling based on the magnitude of the project too. Because the light rail projects are the largest of the projects that we have, 4 or 5 times larger than a Gold Line project, for example.
Yeah, I think it might be helpful to have this chart be, somehow convey the, what's normal, what's not normal for the scale and the complexity, or maybe even make it, add more dimension to it so that you can see the other factors. Because right now, I think people might look at this and not understand the difference between the other risks, and that there are additional factors that, to be considered when you have a large-scale, complex, long-term project.
Councilmember Pacheco, did you have a question?
No.
Okay. Any additional? I just have a quick comment before we leave this and we can move on. So for the market, the CMC advancing the alignment, one comment, so this is also like a 2023 thing, so for like part of the provide, how we present it, there might be, I think, I would recommend for this one and like the one on the prior slide where there's an immediate decision that kind of, that we have a time factor, that it be flagged somehow on these slides so that we know that we see the criticality of time factored in. And then the other, what are the next steps? I know that we've got the CMC, I believe you're going out for some more comment. Oh, there you go, all right.
Our last slide.
Okay.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I can cover this quickly. There would be 2 Transportation Committee business items that would come before this committee when you're ready to receive those. One is the capital grant agreement. The other one is a capital budget amendment that goes along with, bringing those funds into the Met Council. After that, the Blue Line contracts notices to proceed. So you did approve limited notices to proceed for the 3 contracts earlier this year. And we've talked about doing another phased limited notice to proceed, maybe not all the way through the end of 2024, but a phased LNTP. Then we have the Corridor Management Committee. The next 2 meetings are outlined here. We will be presenting a recommendation for the final segment in Minneapolis on Thursday of this week. We've already presented the recommendations for Brooklyn Park, Crystal, and Robbinsdale. And then next month, a resolution to do a final route recommendation. So that'll be September. And then after that, the preferred alignment, which is what they would be in the resolution in September, the preferred alignment would be presented in that SDEIS next year. And then, as we discussed, municipal consent mid-2024.
Perfect.
And that's it.
All right, any closing thoughts, comments? It's a lot, but that's why we wanted to make sure we did this, because we have lots of decisions coming up. If there are additional questions or comments, please reach out to myself or to Chris or to Nick, and we'll make sure we get information for everyone. Very good. Thank you guys for being very efficient. We covered a lot. And with that, we are adjourned.